Hi, thanks for joining me, and for those who've been here before, welcome back. For those who haven't, welcome. So today's video is about an album by my first favourite band, Genesis, and this is their 1981 release, Abacab, and this has just come out on Analogue Productions Atlantic 75th anniversary series, which is a double 45 RPM cut from the original master tapes by Chris Bellman. Now I'll just show you what you get here. It's a very nice solid cover. It's not embossed, which the original was. This is my original. I don't know if you can see, but that is actually embossed around here. There were 4 different versions of this in 4 different colours. I'm pretty sure all of the Analogue Productions ones are in this this sort of colourway, so to speak. But the original was a single album, and this is the inner sleeve, both sides of, and it was it packed quite a lot of music onto a single disc, because, well, you know, that's just the way things were going at that time. And this is how this is presented. So you've got the same artwork used in a gatefold, and it is a really nice solid cover. There's no question about that. Okay, so Genesis, Abacab. Let me just set the scene a little. So this was the third album after Genesis became a 3-piece band. Steve Hackett left, I think, in 1977. 1978 they released, and then there were 3. Then in 1980 they released Duke, and 1981 they released Abacab here. The next studio album was a self-titled Genesis, which I have done a video about, which I'll put a link to up here. Okay, that was the album with Mama on it. Okay, now Abacab. This for me, and well, I think this for everybody would indicate the point at which Genesis really sort of took a change in direction from being unquestionably a prog rock band, progressive rock band. They really entered the world of pop with this. And sure, they'd had some singles. I mean, Duke had Turn It On Again, which was quite a successful single. And then there were 3, had Follow You, Follow Me, which at the time had been their most successful single. But, you know, they were still definitely, I would say, a prog rock band. And with Abacab, they changed engineer. For years and years they'd been using David Henschel as sort of either an engineer or producer engineer capacity, and for this they changed to Hugh Padgham. Now Hugh Padgham produced Peter Gabriel's incredibly awesome 3rd album, which was released in 1980, and that had Phil Collins on drums on some of the tracks. And that was where they kind of came up with the gated reverb sort of drum sound, the sort of, you know, on the track Intruder on Peter Gabriel's 3, you've got this sort of like do 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 kind of, you know, Phil Collins drum sound. Also, there were no cymbals on Peter Gabriel's 3. It was a real I mean, Gabriel 3 is a phenomenal album, don't get me wrong. It's stunning, and Gabriel is one of my all-time favourite musical artists, there's no question. And I think what Hugh Padgham did with him on that album is startlingly good. And actually the fact that he used Phil Collins for drums in part, along with Jerry Morossa, I think, you know, Phil's parts were awesome. And anyway, the story behind this is that Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford were really kind of taken by Phil's drum sound from Peter Gabriel's 3. Now, Padgham also produced Phil Collins's first solo album, Face Value, which again I've done a video about before, the Atlantic 75th anniversary version. Put a link up here. And again, that was a really successful album, and I think was a really good album. But again, use this You've Got In The Air Tonight, which again, it's got that very sort of it's the same old kind of drum sound, you know. And so anyway, so Rutherford and Banks, the other two members of Genesis at this point, were kind of really taken with that drum sound. So they got shot of David Henschel and pulled in Hugh Padgham. And they built their own studio by this time, and they enlisted Hugh Padgham as an engineer rather than as a producer, and they produced the album themselves. Now, this album is, if there's one thing I'll say about it, it is the drums are really at the front. And it, you know, the little story I've told you about Collins's drum sound, which is really, really, really impressive, and I think it's used incredibly well on Peter Gabriel's 3. And I think you can't deny with how well it's used on In the Air Tonight, for instance, and certain other tracks on Face Value. Although my favourite track on Face Value is probably Tomorrow Never Knows. And of course, subsequently following this, after this, it was again used very well, very famously in the track Mama. But this album, to me, personally, is probably, I mean, I bought this because I'd got every single thing that Genesis had released up to this point. Not just the albums, but all the singles, everything. I was absolutely obsessed. So I bought this, and it was just, you know, I think I was kind of quite impressed with that drum sound at first. And it's got that sort of 80s, very, very upfront, kind of very compressed. You know, basically everything is loud on this album, you know, just compress the hell out of it. And the drums are very much at the front. But when you put Abacab on and you sort of, you know, when I first got this, you know, I probably quite liked it, I think, but I much preferred the following album. But, you know, it really didn't stand the test of time for me. And I never got anything after that. In fact, I never bought 3 Sides Live. I never bought We Can't Dance. I never thought, I mean, literally, I never bought anything after that. You know, Genesis were no longer the band that I knew and loved. Having said all that, and I've worn this T-shirt because it kind of implies that I'm you know, an old dinosaur of a fuddy-duddy. And, you know, this is the interesting thing about Abacab is, in the UK, I've got these results here written down. So Duke, the album before this, which, you know, it was definitely not sort of regarded as one of Genesis's greatest albums ever, but I think it was still kind of prog. In the UK, Duke sold 300,000 copies, and in America, 1 million copies. Obviously, America's a much bigger market. Whereas this, Abacab, in the UK, sold 100,000 copies in the UK. So it completely bombed compared with Duke. Whereas in America, it did 2 million copies. Now, that's a hell of a lot more records sold. So that's made a hell of a lot more money for Genesis. So they're sort of, you know, dipping a toe into becoming pop stars rather than prog rock kind of dinosaurs. Clearly paid off for them, even though, you know, their kind of hardcore existing prog rock fan base might have been, you know, slashing their wrists in desperation and despair. So it's an interesting time. Now, I'm just going to sort of run through. I will say first of all, actually, because the essence of the, okay, why did I buy this? You know, a $60 super pressing of a record, which, you know, as I said, the only reason I bought the original was because I was a Genesis completist and absolute fanboy at the time. And of course, before I bought it, I hadn't heard it. I bought it on the day of release. So, you know, I bought it and it was a new Genesis album. So I had some sense of delight, but, you know, that didn't it didn't really last that long, you know. So why did I buy this? Well, it's a kind of an interesting thing. I wasn't going to, because, you know, funds aren't limitless, and I probably haven't played Abacab, my original, in 40 years. I don't know, at least 30, I would say. But the fact of the matter is, Joanna, my wife, she would say that Abacab is actually her favourite Genesis album, heaven forbid. But the thing is, she got into Genesis from getting into Phil Collins. So she got into Phil Collins first, and, you know, probably with, you know, How I Must Be Going and Face Value and all that kind of stuff, and then got into Abacab as the band that Phil Collins was in, you know. And, you know, that was at the point she got into Phil Collins, their most recent album. So I was not going to get it, and Joe was going, no, you've got to get it. Come on, it's my favourite Genesis album, you've got to get it. So we got it, and we put it on. And now I will just say that that in terms of, if you've got Genesis, or if you've got Abacab already and you're a fan of Abacab, and I fully appreciate that whilst I'm not, it was probably doubly successful than Duke. So I appreciate that I am in a minority, and certainly in the States, which is where most of my viewers are, this was a step forward for Genesis. So, you know, forgive me for disagreeing with most of you. And, you know, I'm sure you'll all be with my wife Jo on this one. But I will tell you how this sounds in comparison with the original. So how the... let me put this back in here just so we know which one we're talking about, okay? Now, right from the word go, the Atlantic 75th anniversary Analogue Productions pressing is far more open. It's a little bit brighter, it's clearer, there's more expression, there's more feeling in the playing, the sound stage is more open, there's more sort of ambience, and I mean, on a sonic grounds, it wins hands down, and it's not by a small margin, okay? But I will say, this is a compressed album in the first place, and this isn't remixed, it's just remastered. So it doesn't, you know, it's probably no less compressed than the original, but it is a significantly better pressing. It's a better mastering, it is much more open, there's much more space and expression in there. And to me, I mean, I started off by playing this to refresh myself before. And I tell you what, I got through the first two tracks, Abacab and No Reply at All, on here. And I just had to stop playing it and go and get Duke and put that on, because I just thought, this is just awful. Just I mean musically, the writing and the playing, and just the to me, I just thought, this is just weak. And I just put on the first track of Duke, and it's just, yeah, it's you know, you can tell it follows on from And Then There Were Three, which you can tell follows on from Wind and Wuthering and Trick of the Tail. So even without getting into the Gabriel era, you know, Duke was still recognisably Genesis. You had all those lush, expansive kind of keyboard parts from Banks, who's a phenomenally gifted musician. And, you know, Collins is one of the greatest drummers ever to live, I think. And, you know, wonderfully expressive, you know, free-flowing time drumming, you know, just stunning. And you put this on, and of course, you know, certainly the first two tracks, without any doubt, it's just sort of robotic, sort of just what on earth type of stuff. But, you know, it's pop, and it's sold loads. It you know, doubled their sales worldwide. So, you know, who am I to complain or comment, really? But anyway, you know, it's not prog anymore, I don't think. You know, there are essences of, there are little bits on it, and I will tell you where I think the high points of this record were. But anyway, there's enough talking about the original. So you put this one on, and it is significantly better, because you can hear, you know, even in that robotic kind of drumming of Abacab, you can hear a little bit of expression and sort of slip-slidey feel in Collins's playing. You can hear a little bit of the sort of expression in you know, Banks's sort of mindless sort of banging down on the keys. And there's a little bit of guitar sort of, you know, it's not Hackett, but, you know, Rutherford does his best. And it's, you know, so if you like Abacab, this is unquestionably better. Okay, so we've covered side one, Abacab and No Reply at All. I mean, No Reply at All, it's just, you know, well, you know, if I'm going to carry on bitching, I mean, it doesn't, I like Face Value, you know, Phil Collins uses the Earth, Wind and Fire horn section there to great effect. They're used again on No Reply at All, but it just sounds flat. And, you know, I'd rather be listening to Face Value or an Earth, Wind and Fire album, frankly, by some margin. We get on to side two of this, Me and Sarah Jane and Keep It Dark. You know, for starters, you've got a drum machine. You know, you've got Phil Collins in your band and you're using a drum machine. And, you know, I think it must be an electric piano because there's a piano very prominent in the mix, but it just sounds so plasticky and artificial. And I think that's in the sort of the production. And this is Genesis is self-produced in their own studio production. They've got rid of David Henschel, and I think that's a mistake. No problem with them bringing in Hugh Padgham. I think bringing in Hugh Padgham because they like his gated reverb drum effect used to such fantastic effect on Gabriel 3 and In the Air Tonight. I just think it's overused here. It's like a one-trick pony and just becomes tedious. But anyway, Me and Sarah Jane, again, it's sort of, you start off with a drum machine, a plasticky piano. When the real drums do cut in, again, they're very forward. It's very much up front. I mean, they are, you know, it's well recorded. You know, Hugh Padgham is a very, very, very gifted engineer. It's great sounding in that way, but it lacks the Genesis signature, which I think is a lot of that is Banks, frankly. You've sort of like really dumbed down Banks's parts and you've pushed them to the back of the mix. It's just, you know, the keyboards are unimmersive. They don't wash over you and take you on a journey. Anyway, that's Me and Sarah Jane. Incidentally, I understand, this may not be true, but I understand the Abacab name, obviously there's 3 A's, 2 B's and a C. And I understand that that's taken from their kind of their idiot dumbed down song structure. So A, B, A, C, something a bit of a contrast, then back to A, B. So they're kind of splitting a song into 4 parts, and that's their nod to progressive rock, I suppose. Now, towards the end of Sarah Jane, this would be the C bit, I guess. It gets a little bit more Genesis-y, where the keyboards are, you know, there's more chords, it's more lush, it's more expansive. But, you know, again, it's hardly suppers ready. It's hardly, you know, it doesn't come within a million miles of anything, even on, frankly, even on going, you know, and then there were 3, let alone Wind and Wuthering or Trick of the Tail. It's just not nowhere near. Keep It Dark, again, just incredibly robotic, very little sort of feel to it. But, you know, if you like that 80s, if you like the sound of this album, it's even better on this pressing. There's no question about that. Right, so I'm just going to show you the back of this because this is quite interesting, because of course this is split down into a double album. So if you're anything like me, double albums, I find often side 3 is the one that is the side that you struggle with. Okay, now side 3 of this double album, which is the first half of side 2 of the original album, Dodo and Lurker and Who Done It. Now, you know, if you read reviews, Who Done It just gets dismissed as a bit of a joke track and like an embarrassment. Dodo and Lurker kind of flow from one into the other. Now, Dodo and Lurker for me are the absolute standout highlight of this album. you really do feel like you're back listening to a Genesis album again. You've got the lush keyboard work of Banks, phenomenal drum, proper drumming, no drum machines. You've got Phil Collins actually playing drums and playing with a sort of a freedom and sort of, slip slidey time signatures, and it's stunning. So, Dodo, Lurker, absolutely 100% back of the net. That's utterly refreshing. Now you go into Who Done It. Now I would say this is a so-so song. I don't think it's absolutely dreadful. It's kind of, Collins era Genesis trying to do a Battle of Epping Foresty type. I don't think that Collins can do the Gabriel kind of whimsical farce humour type of thing at all, really. But it's he gives it a stab, but actually it's really, really, really not bad at all. And I would say, if we think of Dodo and Lurker as one track, I would say Who Done It is my second favourite track on the album. So in fact, by a long way, my favourite side of this double version of this album is actually side 3. Now we get onto side 4. We've got Man on the Corner, and again this is a Collins solo composition, the only one I think on the album, yeah. And actually it really does sound like a track off of Face Value. Now I think Face Value is a better album than this, so take that as a positive, okay? But again, it's, you've got a drum machine. You've got the best one of the best drummers in the world, and it's a drum machine. But it's a really good vocal performance, along with the vocal performance on Dodo and Lurker. The vocal performance on Man on the Corner is really, really, really damn good. So again, it's like, not bad at all. Okay, Like It or Not. Again, that's more, and then there were 3-ish. So it's, again, it's hardly classic era Genesis, but it ain't bad. And it is. You've got more lush keyboards. The cymbals and the synths or the piano sound do sound really synthetic. I mean, they do on the original. They sound better on here than on the original. There's no, in every respect, this sounds better than the original. Don't get me wrong. And you could mistake it for sounding far more dynamic, because it is far more open and it's far cleaner. But actually, I think if you really listen to it and kind of get what you're listening to, it is actually, it's their production. They've just turned all the notches up to 11 and used limiting and compression to just make basically everything loud, so the song's not so bad for Like It or Not, but the sound ain't great. Okay, another record, the last track on the album. What's kind of better about this is the drums are further back in the mix and the keys are slightly more forward in the mix. Again, the piano sounds synthetic. The drums, even though they're further back in the mix, they still are that very much sort of, kind of, I think, Phil Collins did a phenomenal job playing drums on Intruder, on Peter Gabriel 3. Had an amazing sound, but then basically just did that over and over again for the next few years, which is a bit irritating, I think it's quite interesting on this. I mean, another record, I think you can hear their Beatles influence here, because this is an album where they're trying to become pop, right? And you'll often hear in interviews them talking about the Beatles as they're sort of, they all love the Beatles and the pop influence they got from the Beatles. I think you can hear that sort of Beatles pop influence in this, but Genesis aren't the Beatles. They never will be the Beatles, and the Beatles will never be prog. So it's kind of it's. I just think this is an album that's it's not their strong point, even though it signifies the point at which Genesis became popular and started making shed loads of money. So it's, you know, most of you, I'm guessing, just purely on the sort of, you know, the facts of the matter. Most of my viewers in the US, and in the US, this was an absolute out-and-out smash. So I think most of you are going to enjoy this record. It definitely sounds better than the original. And I would just say ignore this grumpy old Brit prog fan who found this a bit sort of sacrilegious. Okay, I don't know how helpful that would have been to you, but you know, it sounds an awful lot better than the original. Chad has done an amazing job. I just wish he'd done this amazing job on either Duke or Wind and Wuthering, or And Then There Were Three, or Genesis Live, or Trespass. Any of those before this. Okay, but there we go. That's just my personal opinion. Apologies if I've offended anybody. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye for now. Bye.